I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah. That is what I heard them say way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, yeah, we have sorely changed. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. That is what I heard them say, yeah. Way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave, yeah, before I become a slave, yeah, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, we have sorely changed. Whoa. Hey, hey. Whoa, oh, 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 whoa, oh, 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 oh. Listen now, I'll be buried in my.
Good afternoon, folks, or good evening for those that are on the Eastern Coast. I am your host tonight, the Eskimo Libertarian. I am not Spike Cohen. I'm literally not Spike Cohen. In fact, Spike Cohen is actually busy he's in studio with Kennedy on Fox Business tonight. So even though I'm not Spike Cohen, this might be what Spike Cohen would look like if he had a lot more Botox, maybe some hair extensions. I don't know. But anyways, so I will be your host tonight. Spike will be conducting the actual interview. So I am playing Vanna White by pressing all the buttons and making things go live. And I will be live in the comments. So you can interact with me there. But the actual interview will be done by Spike Cohen. So moving right along. If you guys are just joining us, make sure you like, comment, and share this video. Make sure you like other people's comments. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you guys ring that bell so that your phone blows up every time Muddied Waters Media goes live. So again, like, comment, and share. Make sure you like each other's comments. And how about this? The comment with the most likes, I'll read after this out loud after the interview. So get to liking each other's comments, make some silly comments, tag your friends, and share to libertarian Facebook groups and stuff like that. Alrighty. But before we get started with the interview, let's go ahead and pay some bills. So first up, the Waffle House Caucus. That's right, folks, the Waffle House Caucus. It is the fastest growing waffle related caucus in the world and is the second largest caucus in the Libertarian Party. So, the Waffle House Caucus, look them up on Facebook and join them. And yeah, Waffle House Caucus. Thomas Queter. Thomas Queter is running for state senate in the 52nd district in New York. He runs better than the government. Get it? Because he's in a wheelchair. And folks, he pays us to say that. So Thomas Queter is an excellent friend. He's got a great sense of humor, and he brings to light a lot of issues that have to do with ableism and stuff like that that come from the government. So go ahead and check out tomfor52.com for his platform and how to support him. That is tomfor52.com. Thomas Queter, I run better than Albany. The Royal Green. This book series is written by Jack Casey, and I will be honest, I have not read this series, and I don't know if anyone with Muddied Waters has actually read this series. Yeah, I don't know if anyone will, but he does sponsor us, so we will talk about him. The Royal Green series. Get this beautifully illustrated trilogy from theroyalgreen.com. The inside is not a picture book, just the outside. It's beautifully illustrated on the outside, not on the inside. So if you need a picture book, this is not the one for you. These are actually rather large books. Finally, a governor. He is the key to Pennsylvania's success. So go check out Joe Solaski, folks. Alrighty. And today's guest is, well, I'm going to let Spike Cohen introduce him actually. So without further ado, Spike Cohen, folks.
All right, cool. I will get started right now. Folks, my guest tonight is an economist who has spent over 20 years as a trader and analyst at a number of securities firms and hedge funds in New York. His research focuses on financial markets, cryptocurrencies, monetary policy, the economics of gaming, and problems in economic measurement. He has been featured or quoted in the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Reuters, CNBC, NPR, Reason Magazine, numerous other media outlets and publications. He is currently an economist and author with the American Institute for Economic Research, one of my favorite groups out there. He also has a series of COVID books, coronavirus books, available right now on Amazon. The most recent one being, I even put it up, here it is. The most recent one being Coronavirus and New Hope. So he's also an eternal optimist, and we're going to talk about that. Ladies and gentlemen, my fellow Americans, please welcome to the show Mr. and soon to be Dr. Peter C. Earle. Pete, thanks so much for being on the show, man.
One hopes. There's a lot of uncertainty, but thanks for having me.
Is that the new hope, that you become a doctor in the process?
I'm finishing a dissertation now and starting to talk very, very loosely about defense states. But I mean, between different lockdowns in different countries and trying to get the dissertation done and work and family issues, these things can be somewhat squishy. They're kind of hard to nail down.
Wait, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. The new hope is coming. Listen, right. I am very excited to have you on because we have talked a lot about macroeconomics on this show, but we're going to get a chance to talk about how it specifically is affecting us when it comes to what's happening with the supply chain and the economy right now. And we've talked briefly about that with other people on the show, but I've been, ever since I found out that you were booked for the show, I've been very excited to really nail that down with someone, specifically that. So thank you again for being on, man. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So let's get into it. Well, first of all, before we get started with that, I always like to ask my guests what got them where they are right now. And you can start as early as you want. I was born at a young age. But what got you into economics? Was there like this aha moment where you realized this is what you wanted to be involved in? Obviously, background in trading and finances. Or was there sort of a gradual evolution over time? Did you just go where the money was? Or, what tell us the Peter C. Earle genesis story.
Yeah, I didn't get bit by a radioactive spider or anything. When I got out of college, I went to work in the financial markets. Well, first of all, as an undergrad, I did take one economics course, and I absolutely hated it. I couldn't understand why I needed to know this stuff. It all seemed so arcane, and at the time, it seemed perfectly useless. So I didn't realize that when I went to work in the financial markets, and then I was kind of an early crypto guy in 2011 or so, when I actually started a business at one point. I didn't realize until maybe about 2014 or 2015, that actually the thread of continuity between so much of what I was doing and so much of what interested me was actually economics. And I liken the change I made from finance to economics as moving from the microscope to the telescope. So much broader sort of view, a look at processes which occur at a very high level, although of course microeconomics is kind of finance anyway in some ways. But so from there, I was doing my own thing, and I went to I came to the Sound Money Project's annual meeting at AIER in 2018, and for the cut of my jib and perhaps for my sins, they hired me.
Well, you've done great work. In fact, the most of what we're going to be talking about is featured on the two of the more recent articles you've done with AIER, and this was actually, it was your article from October 2nd that actually sparked us reaching out to you to have you on the show, because we're like, yes, this is who we were looking for. We were looking for someone that had a broad grasp of this and was ready to delve down with a Jew in his guest room for an hour. So I'm really excited about that. Now, you have these books that came out. It's a series. The most recent one is Coronavirus and New Hope. I think it started with coronavirus and economic crisis, right? And then there's been a few since then.
Yeah, there was coronavirus and economic crisis, then coronavirus and economic recovery. Then there was coronavirus and disease modeling, coronavirus and human rights, coronavirus and New Hope, and maybe, who knows, coronavirus strikes back. Coronavirus rides again.
Coronavirus attack of the variants. Yeah. That's good. No, I like that you're building a parallel Star Wars fanfic universe based on what we're actually experiencing right now. So tell us a little bit about that series. Are you basically chronicling how, kind of taking a step back and making a kind of dispassionate look of how COVID has affected these different things, or is it just sort of a timeline? What are you trying to accomplish with the series?
There's both. I mean, so there are, most of the books are the intro and the conclusion are written by me, and I also write about anywhere from half to three quarters of the articles. But I also have articles that were written by other people at or in association with AIER. And the first two, Crisis and Recovery, actually cover what was happening during the lockdowns and then what was happening as things were opening back up. The next three, Disease Modeling, Human Rights, and New Hope. New Hope also sort of covers what's happening in the spring of 2021, late winter and spring of 2021. But I would say that books 3 and 4, which are both disease modeling and human rights, are more on those topics. The way that quantitative models, I mean, many of the same criticisms which are made about econometrics you could make about epidemiology. And that's what disease modeling has to do with. I was really taken aback when some years ago, long before the coronavirus outbreak, before the pandemic, there were scientists saying that they could learn about how diseases spread and what people are likely to do from an event that occurred in World of Warcraft with I believe it was called the corrupted blood spell, where the way people responded was, some hid and some were sort of griefers and they spread the disease on purpose. And it really disturbed me to think that beyond making interesting parallels between what happened in the game and the real world, it would actually try to base real life policy, right. I hope not policy, but on games. So that's all in the book on disease modeling. And then human rights really started with an article I wrote, in which basically I assert that the UN has basically proven that it has no teeth and it should probably be abandoned because with something like 1.5 or 2 billion people under lockdown at one point, which in the U.S. is bad enough. In countries which are already subsisting on very low levels of food and that sort of thing, very low standards of living, it's devastating. And that there would be starvation, and the long-term effects would be devastating. So those two books are more about what was happening overall than at a specific time.
Yeah, in fact, I'm glad you brought that up, because this is something I said more than a few times, even when the lockdowns were being threatened. This was like, I guess maybe late February, early March of last year, where I was saying, I was still running for the nomination at that point, and I'm saying, folks, what is this going to do to people who already are relying on almost entirely from a combination of food aid from wealthier countries and either tourism, trade, whatever, doing business with wealthier countries. What happens when you shut the economy down temporarily, temporarily being for however many months, and red light, green light, turning it back on and off, like that's how that works. But then also probably cutting off the aid because they're going to say, well, we can't, we don't know the safety conditions. And, we didn't know what this virus looked like back then, but I thought it was safe to assume that if you were young and healthy, that the odds were, unless this was some kind of weird, sci-fi flick where only the young and healthy are affected. Typically, the people that are in these countries tend to be younger, tend to not necessarily be healthier in a broader sense, but they tend to be, they don't have obesity issues. These are the people who are the least likely to be affected by the virus itself. And it seems like we're just throwing away billions of people, or at least hundreds of millions of people who rely entirely on having other wealthier countries doing business with them, and in some cases helping them, providing them with things. What happens to them? And the fact that the initial response I got from people, including those who consider themselves, bleeding heart types, was, well, we're just going to have to figure it out, it made me realize, like, oh, you don't really care about them. Like that wasn't the concern you said that it was. So I'm glad you actually brought that up.
So I mean, it really starts in two ways, right? It starts with either stupidity or criminal disregard for human welfare. Okay, so with the arrival of the virus came these shutdowns, or lockdowns, stay-at-home orders, all this sort of thing, mostly in March and April. And that's really where the story begins. Americans and people around the world were basically told, you can have an economy or you can have public health, but not both, which is by far the falsest dichotomy, since you're either with us or against us. And as we start this conversation, I want to say this two times, because it's something that I think is one of the most pernicious myths to come out of this, and one that I find a need to repeat every day. Governments, not a virus, caused what we're seeing today. I'll say it a second time. State policy, not SARS-CoV-2, CoV-2, caused what we're seeing today. Period, underscore, boldface, all of it.
No, I'm glad you're saying that. I've had people tell me, and we're going to talk about this. Well, the reason that the shipping crisis is happening is because of all the people that died of COVID. And I said, the fact that you think that, you're definitely in that realm of people who, in the opinion poll, thought that 50% of people who get COVID die in the hospital or what. Like, you certainly see this as something completely. This is an economic issue that was caused by bad government policy, and obviously we're going to delve into that.
Absolutely. Yep.
So let's talk about, let's define the problem. Getting into economics, you got to define the issue first and start measuring from there. So what exactly is happening? Let's talk about the symptoms of what are taking place right now with the economy. What would you say, we're looking at, empty cargo containers that are waiting out. They're not even clogging ports. They're waiting outside of ports. They're not even able to get into the ports. You have ships waiting to dock. Truckers are sitting for hours or days waiting to pick up the cargo on the other end. So there's obviously a couple bottlenecks happening there. There's this. I love to watch the corporate media work with government. Was it Wall Street Journal or Forbes that put out something saying, "Don't be upset, just lower your expectations." And it was just like, wow, okay, thanks, Jeff. It was Washington Post. It was like, hey, thanks, Jeff Bezos, who just got a $10 billion no-bid contract on something they didn't even do. I'll lower my expectations about what I can have for the holiday season. What are you seeing beyond this that are the major issues? Before we get into the causes, what are the major things that are happening right now?
So, I mean, first of all, how could anybody who doesn't play with spaceships not have lower expectations than Jeff Bezos? But anyway, that's and by the way, I'm in huge favor of private space travel. I'm just saying.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a weird. He would be better off being quiet. But there's a view, and I don't want to jump. I'm going to take one step back, if you don't mind.
Sure.
There's a view that, and it's among public officials, that economies are like lamps, and you can shut them off and turn them on at will, with little or no consequences. Right?
Yeah.
So with lockdowns, and then a huge monetary expansion campaign by the Fed, and then a number of fiscal stimulus measures, which all of that led to a massive surge in demand and plummeting supply, right? So you have skyrocketing demand for people who are bored, they're lonely, they're worried, they suddenly have lots of disposable income, probably less expenses too. They're not going to work every day and all that. And at the same time, you have plummeting supply from shut down factories, mines, mills, stores, and all that sort of thing. And what's interesting is that we saw the exact opposite of this at the same time. When OPEC flooded the market because they had a dispute in prices and nobody was traveling, we saw oil futures close down $32 a barrel. So on the other side of this, you have skyrocketing demand for goods and services, tons of money out there, and absolutely nothing, no production, no distribution coming out, all that sort of thing. That's the root cause of all of this.
Yeah. And so basically this is central planning. This is
absolutely.
I remember watching over the last year with some weird combination of just misery and very strong level of Schadenfreude. Except the problem is it's a Schadenfreude where it's like, yeah, I know I'm experiencing it too, but you guys, it was a huge I told you so. It's like the stereotypical we're all in the dungeon, about to be executed, and I get to go, who was right here? Great, I was right. I wish I wasn't right. But,
sure.
Austrian economists, Chicago school economists, even some Keynesians were saying this is going to lead to exactly what we're seeing right now. You're going to have some things that have massive gluts. You're going to have other things that are greatly restricted, not just where it affects pricing, but where it's just not available. And then thanks to, in some cases, price gouging laws, there's just going to be no supply of it. They're going to say, okay, great. At that price, I can't supply it. And so you're just going to have a shortage of that thing. You're going to have all of these restrictions that made our supply chain so brittle to begin with are going to come to light because it's not going to be able to ramp up. So earlier this month, you wrote, before the public hysterics, lockdowns, and stay-at-home orders, and even before the first offloading was delayed, nominal rigidities had ossified U.S. port operations and made them particularly vulnerable to even the slightest kinks in supply chains. Can you talk about the nominal rigidities and the policies that were causing that so we can dive into that?
Sure. So the term nominal rigidities refers to prices that, whether because of collective bargaining or whether because of fixed wages or fixed sale prices or whatever, don't move. They don't respond to supply and demand, or they don't respond in the way that they might otherwise. The sophistication of the modern world, the modern commercial world, is very easy to overlook. This incomprehensible variety of goods from all around the world that are right at our fingertips, within a day or two, has become so reliable that we take them for granted. But when in fact, all along, it's been an extremely fragile and coordinated dance of sorts. So we'll go to the dock work, okay? Most, if not all, dock work in the US is collectively bargained, right? When I was a kid in the New York City area, we called them stevedores, dock workers, right? Some of them earn more than doctors do. Now, I'm not saying they have skills. I'm not saying they don't have skills or that that's justified, but those prices are not made on the market. Those prices are made by collective bargaining agreements. For years, those unions have militated against upgrading to the type of equipment you would find on docks, such as in China, Denmark, and a number of other countries, which have extremely sophisticated trade relationships and a lot of sea travel, that sort of thing. That artificially lowers the headcount and increases the time it takes to do work. And guess what? This may surprise you, but they're paid hourly. So that's a huge source of nominal rigidities, which after a few, so there were exogenous and endogenous hits that the supply chain took. This is an endogenous one.
Yeah. So this is, it was interesting. There was an article that came out that talked about, in fact, I think was that your article? It was with AIER, where it talked about the collective bargaining that we're like one of the only developed countries on. In fact, it was AIER. This might have been your article. Was it?
Yeah.
Okay, where it talked about the fact that, okay, so I've already quoted you on this show multiple times, so congratulations. And I actually ratioed Joe Biden on his own post by sharing your article and saying, why aren't you talking about why we weren't 24/7 operating to begin with? So
that's why my phones are bugged.
That's why you're now on a watch list. You're welcome. So we were the only one of the only, if not the only, certainly the only of the largest developed countries that was operating on a not a 24/7 schedule. It's like a 5-day
Yeah,
schedule, 18/5 schedule or something like that. And
yeah. I've been told it's something like 5 a.m. to 9 p.m., something like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So yeah, so which to them, that sounds like a nightmare to a union worker, but in the developed world and in the new age economy, goods and services are supposed to be moving all the time, 24/7,
absolutely.
not
Yep.
not during expanded bank hours. And so, that was an incredible thing, but that's only, as you pointed out in your most recent article. That's so funny, that's your
Right.
article. That, as you pointed out in your most recent in one of your more recent articles, that only makes up, now 10%'s a lot, but that only makes up about 10% of the actual cause of the backlog. So
Right.
what are some of, in your mind, the biggest causes of this backlog?
So another thing is that the unions, the dock workers unions, have militated against using the most up-to-date equipment.
Yep.
So if you take a look at the port operations in places like, excuse me, Rotterdam, um, Amsterdam, places like that,
Yeah.
you'll see really sophisticated equipment that's used. I've been told, but I haven't seen it. There's actually there are laser guided systems which can stack and remove containers from ships, and they move very quickly and very efficiently.
Hmm.
We don't have those in the U.S. in many places, in most places, because the unions have basically prevented them from being installed, and also a lot of the work is still done by hand, which I mean, a few people, when they've heard this, they've said that simply can't be the case. But when the Biden administration went to the unions and said, "Hey, can you go from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. to 24/7," as occurred in a few places, all they did was increased their working hours, but they didn't increase the efficiencies. They didn't improve the rate. Whether it's containers an hour or ships per
Right.
day or whatever, that are going to be offloaded.
Yeah.
So it's I mean that's really at the crux of the issue.
So this could end up leading to, okay, great, we'll work this many more hours, but there's going to be a slowdown. There was a similar thing that happened in France, and this was in, I'm dating myself now. I want to say this was in like 2004 or 2005, where they were
Mm-hmm.
having an issue with their rail workers, and that's all unionized. In fact, those are, I think, actually public employee unions. And I'm trying to remember the exact details, but basically they made them work more hours. So they just slowed the speed of the trains down so that roughly it was the same amount. So it actually screwed over the passengers, the consumers of that product, because now it was
Sure.
taking them longer to get to where they needed to go. So nothing was happening other than, all that happened was that the union workers were now getting more hours of work, and it was taking longer for people to get to work. So do you think it's possible that this could actually be that, where it actually in one way slows things down, because yes, they've expanded the hours, but there was no actual promise that there would be an increase in output or productivity?
Yeah. Yeah. At the very least, it doesn't help. And it probably, more likely, it probably makes things at least a little, if not much worse. For decades, Americans have been told, look for the union label, buy American, and that unionization was good and right, salutary, and that we should be happy to spend more on U.S. goods versus embracing global competition. I mean, I think it's time for, it'll never happen. A politician will never do it, but I wish Americans could somehow say, listen, for years we bought your overpriced goods. We put up with the artificial hindrances that politicians erected to coddle you against competition. It's your turn now to give back. Act like adults who know the demand curve sloped down, and it's and embrace competition, even temporarily. Even
Yeah.
temporarily, suspend the minimum wages, suspend the artificial restraints on headcounts and all that sort of thing. I mean, again,
Yeah.
fat chance of that happening, but that's what I think should be done.
No, I tend to agree with you. I'm actually not against unions per se. I'm against what
No,
they've turned
I mean,
into.
it's
I,
to me, I'm not against unions. I mean, I think it's the right of association, all that. I wouldn't ban
right.
unions, but I
Yeah.
would say, listen, if you're going to require me, or if you're going to basically muscle the government to make me buy your goods, your agreements have to be flexible too. And this is one of those times when we should invoke some sort of an emergency valve, which says, okay, guys, for the next 6 months, for next year, or until the backlog of ships is less than 5, per day or whatever, we're going to bring more people on. And yeah, you can call them scabs or whatever, but we're going to get this thing going again.
Yeah, it's going to be one or the other. It's either you get to keep your closed shop stuff in place, but there's going to have to be some flexibility on your side, or hey, let's re-examine the idea of these closed shops.
Right.
A side note to that, and I don't know if you know much about this, but apparently either yesterday or the day before, Ron DeSantis called for the ships to just come to Florida. He said we've got the ports, we've got the workers, and he said he was it's been speculated that he's speaking with the people that have the docks there to talk about expanding it. I don't know much about shipping specifically when it comes to the logistics, so maybe you know this better than me. Is it possible, obviously longer term, expanding a dock or something like that is a multi-month, multi-year process, but if everything remained as it is there a possibility that the center of shipping in the US could shift to the East Coast between the Panama Canal and just the differences in rigidity and pricing and so forth, that you could end up seeing this sort of shift from California and the western ports to Florida and the southeastern ports as a means of getting goods by ship into the US? Or are there too many geographical things that would make that not really possible?
I mean, I'll give you the economist answer. It's all about the cost. It's all about the prices. If they can make them at least competitive, I mean, it's worth more to shipping companies to have goods moving than not. So what they're seeing right now is untenable. The question is whether whether a move or a change to Florida is semi-permanent or permanent, and that all depends on the cost. Right now, I think many of these firms, many of the big shipping firms, and the firms that are sending goods through on tankers or rather cargo ships and that sort of thing, they want this stuff to get going. And I think if they knew it was temporary, they might be inclined to eat some of the higher cost just to sort of smooth over things and keep their supplier relationships happy and content. But it's really, if they can make the cost, if Florida can make the cost decisively lower and really sort of cut into these overhead costs that are so sticky and represent such rigidities in the cost structure, yeah, I could see that happening. Sure. I mean, it's happened with airlines.
Yeah, it has definitely happened with the airlines. And you could,
Sure.
even if it takes a few extra days to get here from, instead of California, compare that to being stuck at sea for some of these boats have been there for like a month and a half. Like, so,
Yep.
you make that comparison, it's a no-brainer, obviously. So
Right.
I was just curious of your thoughts on that, because I literally found out about that like yesterday evening, right
Yep.
before we did our show last night, and I thought, well, okay, that maybe that we may end up seeing where Florida becomes, if not the shipping capital, at least takes quite a bit of the
Market
juice
share.
from California, the profit share, the market share from California.
Right.
These are the problems with what happens when the ships get here and how they're being processed, and that's been a
Right.
problem for a while.
Hmm.
But we reached a crisis that didn't seem to be something that had been slowly happening over the course of several years. We suddenly had a crisis, or at least if it was building up, it wasn't over the last generation. This was an issue that happened in a relatively pretty short period of time. I
Sure.
am of the belief that the biggest cause for this massive influx and the problems with then the reason that we can't rise to adapt to it is because of all these things that are in place, all these policies. And we could even go further and talk about how California is not allowing any truck made before 2013 to get on. I mean, there's endless policies we could talk about that are causing problems. Yep. But that's why we haven't been able to rise to the demand that's been coming. This influx to me feels like this is what happens when you play red light, green light with the economy, not just here, but around the planet with these lockdowns and stay-at-home orders and mandates and everything else. Also possibility that this is, at least domestically, but possibly in other countries as well, the result of vaccine mandates where people, say, okay, fine, I won't take the vaccine, so you've got to find someone else to do my job. Am I off here, or are those lockdowns and other policies what caused this massive influx and the problems related to it?
Sure. So there's, as I said before, there's exogenous and endogenous explanations for what's happening. I mean,
right.
certainly the mandatory vaccinations and people who only a few weeks back, maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, stopped receiving government aid, really sort of kept a part of the labor force at bay. But, there's other things too. For example, there were 3 events I covered in one of the articles. There was the Ever Given getting stuck in the Suez. And there were a couple of Chinese port closures. And what I think because you can't be an expert in everything. What I think a lot of people fail to understand is that one of these events where a giant ship gets stuck in the Suez for 6 days, it backs up 400, say, ships. All of these things are not additive; they're multiplicative. Where 1 day delay becomes 6, becomes 30, becomes when does it happen? And so that's a big part of it. Is that these are I mean, without getting too into this part, these are extraordinarily nonlinear functions. The delays are almost like derivatives, where $1 equals 3, and then you lose another dollar, and it's 12, and then it goes like that. So that's really what's happening. But everything from those delays to the nature of the shipping containers themselves right now are causing these delays. I mean, I don't think I put that in any of my articles. Have I spoken about what's happening with shipping containers?
I don't believe so. Yeah, I was going to say, this is the first I'm hearing of that. I don't think that was in there. Yeah.
So of course, there's a finite number of shipping containers in the world, and they're made by only a few companies. And this company tries to make them at a rate that kind of replaces the ones that are too old. They last about 12 years, and they're a miracle of the modern commercial world, because you can take this one container, fill it with stuff. It can travel by truck to a ship, get offloaded onto a train, be taken to a barge. I mean, they're compatible with any number of forms of transportation. And what's happening is that as ships are being offloaded, as cargo and containers are coming off of ships, it's going so slowly that they're filling up warehouses. And so many of the shipping companies and many of the retailers are saying, don't take my stuff out of the shipping container, because I don't know if I'll get another one back. So the shipping containers are starting to be used as makeshift warehouses or mini warehouses. And what's happening is that now there's a shortage of containers. And some of them also, by the way, are just floating in the middle of, or not in the middle, but off the coast of California and other places.
Meaning that they're not being filled up with the product to go somewhere else. And
Right. I mean, a container in hand is worth 2 on the port. So if you've got one, the standard operating procedure right now is don't give it up until the stuff comes out and more stuff goes in.
So you said there are only a few companies making this thing. Now, you're correct that it is a wonder of the modern age. It's also a shaped piece of metal, or series of pieces of metal. Yeah. Why are there only a handful of companies making this?
I haven't looked deep. I haven't looked too in depth on that issue. I wonder if it's a low margin business, or if there are more likely some sort of obscure, arcane transportation requirements that only a few companies maybe have the concession for, or something like that. I don't actually know. Maybe, okay. I mean, now I have something else to write about, so thanks.
Coronavirus and shipping containers. No, but here's the thing. I would suspect that it's probably a combination of both. That you've got some kind of weird, policies, centrally planned policies that are, making it where only a handful. There might even be some IP protections here, or eye protections. I know it's like ATM machine. But also, metal costs a fortune right now. So it might be that one of these things would cost $1 million to make right now. So everyone's just making do with the ones that they have, or something like that. But that's also the problem of a policy issue.
There's a particular route for which using a storage container used to cost, I believe, $1,000 to $1,500, and now the cost is over $25,000. To give an idea of scarcity pricing in action.
Now
that, actually, I should say that was a few weeks ago. It might have come down some, but if it has, not much.
So when it was, how long ago was it that it was $1,000 to $1,500? Are we talking like?
So let's see. The Suez Canal blockage was, I think, March or April, and then you had a port close in July, and then another port close in August. So I'm going to guess it was $1,000 as early as the start of this year.
Oh,
late winter, early spring, something like that.
Yeah, I hope
if your watchers are interested, I can look it up. I can do the research.
Yeah, I'm interested in it. And by interested, I mean horrified. I hope that 25,000 was like some weird spike in price that's coming down, and that's not a slope that's happening, because, geez, oh man.
Well, it's a specific route. So
Oh,
it's,
okay.
it might be an obscure route where there's not a lot of traffic anywhere. But either
Oh,
way,
okay.
for something for something to increase, 20 something fold, shows exactly how high demand is and how slow supply is coming to sate it.
Right, and this is the problem with pulling levers on the economy. I don't know if you watch Squid Game. I actually don't watch Squid Game, but I've seen the scenes of Squid Game where the doll is facing away and says, I don't know if it's counting or it's playing a
Red light,
song.
green light.
Yeah, red light, green light. But when it turns around, turns its head around, anyone that's moving at all gets killed.
Yep.
So this would be like that game, except every time it turns around and people get killed, it goes, I can't believe that happened. Who did that? And then turns around and does it again. That's
Right.
what the government's been doing. They've been playing this game of Simon Says with the economy. And then when businesses fall apart, when entire sectors of the economy are in chaos, when people can't get needed goods and services, when the price of basic needs and necessities is reaching an point where an increasing number of Americans who are on food and other types of subsidies still can't afford what they need, at some point you have to admit that maybe having a small handful of people pretend that they can decide how everything's going to work without any price signaling involved at all, maybe that's not the best way to do it.
Could not agree more. Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
So far, by the way, the Biden administration's brilliant idea is to find ships that are floating off the coast of southern and central California, $100 per container per day.
Yes,
that's the miracle solution that they've come up with. Which, by the way, a Panamax class ship carries what's called their capacity. They call them TEU, 20-foot equivalent units, which is one container.
Yeah.
13,000 TEUs comes to $1.3 million per day. So that's the fine that a Panamax class ship carrier is going to pay per ship, $1.3 million per day, which I guarantee you most of these days are full. So that's the level of sort of creative policy making that the Biden administration has.
They've finally taken the anti-homeless policies of many metro areas and applied it to the boats waiting to unload their products. Right. And I mean, I can't imagine who's going to have that price unloaded to them. Certainly wouldn't be the consumer. But where they've been saying, basically, we're going to stop homelessness by making it illegal for you to be homeless here. Basically, we're gonna except the fines are $100 and a night in jail or a day in a couple days in jail, and then get the hell out of whatever this town is. Now they've successfully found a way to apply that heartless and counterintuitive policy to shipping containers. Amazing.
If anybody should be paying fines, it should be every public official who thought that the economy could work like a lawnmower. And I mean that should be the form of reparations. If there's reparations that should be made, it's from public officials to small business owners who were ruined by these ridiculous policies, which were, as I said before, based upon an absurd false dichotomy. That's my personal view.
No, I agree with you. The problem here, Pete, isn't that there's a bottleneck of getting the goods. They're just loitering. They're just being a bunch of lazy ne'er-do-well loiterers, loitering out at sea. It's incredible.
Right. No, they because they get paid by by the minute and such. So I mean, the whole time this is by the way, the whole time this is going on, the crews of those ships are only outfitted for a certain amount of time. So the initial ones had to come into shore, buy more food, come back out. They had to put things behind. I mean, the knock-on effects of this are incredible. I mean, I've already written about how lockdowns are accountable for 4,000% increases in Pokemon card prices and the collapse of prices of natural cheese. So, I mean, there will be books written about this, hopefully one by myself, in the coming years about everything that this silly decision to make people choose between public health and having an economy led to.
Yeah, this is that false dichotomy. Do you want to be sick? Or do you want to be healthy, or do you want to be prosperous? Because we all know that poor people have the best health outcomes, right? Like it's definitely proven that if you choose poverty over health, or poverty over sickness, that you end up being much healthier that way.
Right.
So
I mean, so human beings human beings used to live to be 150 years old, and then after the Industrial Revolution, now we only lived about 70 or 80. It's a shame.
Yeah. It's terrible. You would think we'd figure it out at this point, but
Right,
you know,
right.
who has time to figure it out when you're being a lazy bum out there on your
Right.
on your ship, refusing to unload your good? It's just
They're obstinate.
astounding.
Yeah.
They're obstinate. They're difficult, is what it is.
That's it.
It's being churlish, is what they're being. This is it is incredible to see this. The thing is, we get frustrated and exasperated. I think maybe the politicians are stupid. I don't think that the actual people crafting policy are this stupid. And we can have this debate or have your thoughts on this. You know, the how much of this is just stupidity and how much of this is malfeasance. Where do you think that falls in? How much of this is people who want to see these crises that they can then exploit for more control, and how much of it is just people that are idiots and really truly don't get that their centrally planned ideas are constantly failing and constantly making things worse?
Yeah, so there's a line that von Mises uses in economic calculation in the socialist commonwealth, and I would say that what we are seeing now is what Mises' phrase "groping in the dark" looks like. This is what groping in the dark looks like. Okay, so as for your question, I'm allergic to conspiracy theories. However, there's nuance to this. I do believe that a lot of politicians are flatly stupid. I do believe that they are sort of automatons who are put into office, and really they do the work of lobbyists, and they're willing to say anything and do anything, and they have their interest groups and all that. But I also believe you can know that a policy is likely to lead to certain outcomes and kind of hope they don't, but know also that you have every excuse available and that most people will give you a pass because they politicians and governments take recourse to lines of argument that as a social scientist, I can't take, right? They can always lobby counterfactuals. Well, you know what? If we hadn't locked down, everybody would be dead. It would have been like Walking Dead or something, you know. 9/10 of the world would be dead. They can say, well, you know, we thought there might be problems, but you know how big business is and their profits. They got to get their profits and that sort of thing. So I do think certainly that some things are done on purpose. I also think there's what I would call just incredibly depraved indifference, where they do things and they say, if it works out, great. If it doesn't, we've got every line in the book.
So kind of somewhere between I like it. You found the centrist position between the third position between being total idiots and being mendacious, in that they're like, you know, there's a good chance this isn't going to work, but I have cover. And of course, there's always the old tried and true. Well, this would have worked if the other party had worked with us. Or if you're in the minority position, you know, this would have worked if they had done it right. But if, you know, we had been in charge, we would have done the lockdowns right. Right.
I mean, it surprises me sometimes. I've been a small L libertarian for a very, very long time.
Yep.
And I still try to analyze economic issues dispassionately. Mm-hmm. But what surprises me sometimes is most libertarians rightly and appropriately and based upon history correctly identify the fact that governments really can't do anything right. They can't plan things, all that, but yet they give them credit for erecting massive, complicated conspiracies, which involve hundreds of people and all sorts of interest groups. And I say, I'm not saying they're not evil enough to do that. I'm saying they're not designed to do that.
He was calling me out there because I look at these things and I'm like, someone has to know this is doing this, and they're good with leveraging it. So I'm of the opinion that you've got this sort of massive group of idiots that are just doing terrible things, and a handful of evil geniuses that are planted in various positions in there who are like, yeah, I'm going to use this. That's sort of my, I guess you'd call it conspiracy theory. But I do think it's
that's a little more nuanced than conspiracy theory. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah. But you're right. I mean, it's like these idiots are ruining everything by design. It's like, well, it's one or the other. So no, I do get you there. The one thing I have not heard nearly enough about, and actually we already, even before you wrote this article, we wanted to talk about this. And then when you wrote the article, we all looked and said, this This is why we got Peter C. Earle. He is pre-gaming our episode to talk about this. So I think this is your most recent. Yeah, this was like 3 days ago. I believe this is your most recent article. To fix the shipping crisis, start by repealing the Jones Act. We talk about the Jones Act so much on this show, and I talk about the Jones Act so much on my social media, out in public appearances. I will say the Jones Act, and unless there's a Puerto Rican or Hawaiian or Alaskan there cheering, everyone else is like, what the hell's the Jones Act? I'm like, or they'll go, yeah, the Jones Act, that sucks. I agree, we should end the Jones. They don't know what the Jones Act is. So, but unless you're, again, Puerto Ricans, people from Guam, people from Hawaii, people from Alaska, especially Puerto Ricans,
shipbuilders.
Shipbuilders. They are acutely aware of what the Jones Act is. Now, for everyone on the show who somehow doesn't yet know what the Jones Act is, even though I keep talking about it, talk to us a little bit about what the Jones Act is first, and then we can dive into how it is a major contributor to what's happening right now.
So the Jones Act is a 1920 act. The Jones Act is actually part of the Maritime Shipping Act, I believe it's called. And basically, it restricts foreign-owned vessels from loading cargo in one U.S. port and unloading it in another. So what it does is, it doesn't restrict, we should be clear, it doesn't restrict foreign ships from dropping off at a number of ports or picking up at a number. But what it does is it prevents them from acting like a bus. Pick up here, drop off there, pick up there, and so on, which is called cabotage, or some people say cabotage, right? Which is intercoastal trade. So in order to do that, a ship has to be American 4 times. It has to be manned by Americans, owned by an American company, built by an American company, and flying under the U.S. flag, which, if it sounds restrictive, it sure is.
Yeah. No, it's super, super restrictive. And we actually, so it was in 1921, and I know that because I did a post on the 100-year anniversary and why it needs to die, and just the sheer amount of suffering it's caused here, and frankly around the globe, but especially here. You want to talk about opportunity costs. It is impossible to measure what we could have been. You know that meme where it shows this like futuristic world, and it said it'll always be like some like obscure thing. This is what the world would have been like if we had listened to Ron Paul, or if we, whatever, like, and it show. But that is potentially what the world could look like had the Jones Act not been passed, or at least certainly in the U.S. The U.S. has the most what they call effective or usable shoreline that has international access, because we also have the Mississippi. So we have the entire, we have all of Alaska, although only a small part of Alaska is actually what's considered effective or usable because of the Arctic. But then you have Hawaii, and you have all of the West Coast. You have all of the East Coast and the Gulf Coast, and then you have the Mississippi, which goes from the top to bottom of the U.S. In the Great Lakes with Canada, but then you have all the way down that goes all the way and goes out to the Gulf. So, long story short, the U.S. should have the most vibrant, robust, and active maritime industry on Earth with no peer. And instead, because of the Jones Act, the U.S. has arguably no maritime industry, is almost entirely just receiving goods and maybe some shipping out. There's no as you mentioned, like intercoastal or intracoastal. I always confuse those two. No we even have the Panama Canal. There's everything in place for the U.S. to do the vast majority of its shipping by ship. And instead, because of the Jones Act, we are reliant on rail and road, which leads to crumbling infrastructure because we overuse our rail and road for things that should be done by ship, which is not only more environmentally friendly, but also cost less. It's still the most cost efficient thing. So long before any of this happened, it has been why we are not even wealthier and more prosperous, and why the goods and services aren't even cheaper. It's a major reason for why more and more of us are buying things from other countries, because it's actually cheaper to have it shipped from another country here on a foreign vessel than have it brought from another state here by truck or by rail.
Yeah.
I could do this for 30 minutes. It's the dumbest thing. So,
Yeah.
question.
Yep.
How is it specifically affecting what we're going through right now?
So, what you were saying before about alternate timelines, it reminds me of some years ago, someone told me that if coal was oil, the U.S. would be Saudi Arabia. Like a similar thing to how we could have an incredible maritime business here with more competition and that sort of thing. So, the longer you write, and I've been writing for some time now, the more you find that a lot of people look at words, but they don't actually read. And I say that because I got so many angry articles, so many angry emails rather on my article saying that suspending the Jones Act wouldn't help, and I even said in the article it's the first thing that should be done. People said you need to do more than that. Like, I can only write the article.
You can't wait.
Yeah. So.
First of all, how dare you think that the only problem we have right now is the Jones Act, writer of 17,000 books about coronavirus? Sorry, go ahead.
Right. So if the idea that ships operating competitively on a more flexible basis, if the idea that wouldn't be helpful, or that rather would be helpful, isn't clear, I can give a few statistics. I've looked these up since then in some of my replies to emails. The cost of an American medium tanker to build one is 3 times the worldwide price for the same ship. 3 times as much. Okay. The cost of operating an American flag vessel is between 2 and 3 times as much as the identical ship flying under a Liberian or any other flag. Okay. Most people don't really care about that. So here's something that hits you and I. To ship crude oil from the Gulf Coast to New York is 3 times the cost to ship from the Gulf Coast to Eastern Canada, which is further away.
Yep.
Okay. That's $5 more per barrel, or 15 cents, up to 15 cents per gallon of gasoline. Who pays that? You, me, everyone else. It's protectionism of the rankest form. And the fact that little old me wrote an article, and I actually got people sending me articles from these maritime and shipping unions, shows me that it's an extremely sore spot and probably one we should be poking a little more.
Yeah. Oh, we should be poking this thing until it bleeds out. You're talking about something 3 times as much to build. Again, talking about multiplicable factors.
Yep.
I think I said it right the first time. Multiplicable factors. 3 times. If something costs 3 times here and then 3 times there, you have to multiply that. So also, these are businesses who measure their margins on single and double digit percentages, right? So it's like if something costs 8% more, it's untenable to do it that way because of the margins they're operating on. 300%.
People think that these margins are like 200, 500%. No.
Yeah, it's just done. You're done. Okay. So it is. There's the opportunity cost. Again, I get this way. I get apoplectic talking about this because I immediately start thinking about what this country would look like minus the Jones Act, especially if it had never happened. Forget if it had been ended 10, 20, 30 years ago, much better off. But if it had never happened and we had this vibrant, thriving maritime industry here, we would not be talking about shipping container problems right now. We would not be talking about problems with getting from point A to point B. We would be talking about how all these other poor schmucks, how hard it is for them to get places. I mean, it is immeasurable to talk about, and then that would work towards the passenger travel industry because, again, just because this is related to goods and services. By the way, Jones Act, does that apply to shipping people from one side to the other, or is it just... is that just goods and services? Because as I'm saying that, I'm not sure.
I must be honest, I don't know. Somebody asked me if it applies to cruise ships too. I don't think so because I seem to recall people get on and off of cruise ships in Bayonne, New Jersey, and in Baltimore and Florida. But I might be wrong. I'm pretty sure it does not apply.
I think it doesn't too, but there's still a carry-on effect in that if we had a more vibrant shipbuilding industry, that would mean lower cost of ships overall because there'd be
Sure,
a
of
higher
course.
demand or higher demand and a higher supply meeting it. There'd be more liquidity in that market, so you would have more access to boats, which
Yep.
inevitably would work its way towards passenger ships as well. So there's still that knock-on effect there.
There would be a trickle down effect in prices and cost structures.
Exactly. Well, and I mean it's adjacent. It's literally the same industry. It's just one's applied to
Sure.
people, one's applied. So there's no way that wouldn't also work its way over to that.
Right.
This was originally designed to protect a very powerful shipbuilding industry in this country. A little
Yep.
bit of historical perspective. When the Jones Act was passed, prior to the Jones Act being passed, the U.S. was the leader in the maritime industry because, again, we have the most usable shoreline. And especially after the Panama Canal was built, we owned the waters, right? Like it wasn't just the Navy that owned the waters. The U.S. merchant marines, the U.S. industry of ship and including shipbuilding, and part of that was because ships were also made out of wood back then. And so going into the late 1700s, 1800s into the early 1900s, most boats were made primarily or entirely from wood, and we had an endless supply of soft lumber to be able to make these boats to be able to do this.
Yep.
So we had, for many reasons, the greatest shipbuilding industry. Now, post World War One, there were suddenly some threats to that industry. You had other countries that were building up their shipbuilding industry. There were companies in other countries that were building up their industry. They were seeing this shift away from wood and towards steel, and there was some uncertainty whether we were going to be able to compete. And the response to that, instead of rising to the occasion and continuing to compete and thrive, was to rent seek and push for cronyism and protectionism, and that's what happened with the Jones Act. Fast forward to today, there's I think like 2 or 3 American shipbuilders who between them make a new ship every couple of years. Is there even an industry? Who is protecting this at this point? Like, who is the powerful group or industry that's protecting this at this point?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of entities, but they fall into two broad. Others prices don't seem to come down the way, say, technology and other prices do. So if you must look for silver lining, a lot about the economy around them.
Yeah, I that's my hope, is that and hopefully is the new hope basically a bunch of people going, oh hey, wow, maybe the government does suck. Is that the new hope in New Hope?
I don't think I said that explicitly, but it's never far from my. It's never 2 words away. It has more to do with just how quickly reopening was embraced. And I drove from Nashville to Memphis through Arkansas to Dallas, and as I got deeper south, in March or April, I guess it was, I found that more and more people were just tired of the nonsense.
Yeah.
And there were more handshakes, and there were more people running around on the beach, even when it was pouring rain, which I thought was, usually people run for shelter, and it was just this sort of a rebirth of sorts going on. But the book covers a number of topics. I don't think I explicitly say that people are more aware of the perniciousness of the dangers of central planning and of government power. But that's definitely the case anyway. Whether or not I say it, that's definitely what's happening.
Yeah, it's obviously easier to show someone how lockdowns are hurting them, or even how a
Sure.
vaccine mandate, which has that corollary effect of people not working, which leads to reductions in supply. It's easier to show that than something like the Jones Act. But if you've already got them on that pipeline of, wow, does government suck at everything they plan? You can be like, yeah, it's even worse, and get them all like, like that guy in
Right.
the Always Sunny in Philadelphia episode where he's, showing them the
Right.
things on the team. He's like, yes, So I think I think there is that potential or that hope, as you put it. Or they could just go on a drive, with me up 95, and every time a truck goes by, I go, that could be on a boat, and start talking about the Jones Act.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the wish that they had died during all of this before they had to take that trip with me. But you're absolutely correct. The watching, it has been very interesting to watch, even as we're now seeing COVID. By the way, COVID waves, I don't know if you agree with me on this, but they're not going away. This is endemic. This is not a pandemic.
COVID's going to be around forever.
It's going to be around forever or a very long time until we start having gene therapy like CRISPR, where they can actually go in and make us completely immune to, and then that means not only is COVID going away, but the cold is going away, the flu is going away, cancers are going away, which, I mean, that will eventually happen. I do believe that's eventually going to happen. In the meantime, it's not going away. And watching with each of these waves an increasing number of people saying, yes, I think people should be safe. Yes, I think we should be, we should be making safe, but an increasing number of people are saying, you can't mandate this away. You can't lock this away. You can't,
Absolutely.
you can't, it's not going away, and we have to come to that reality. And
They could do that. They could mandate it away, but then we have to be happy having an extremely rapid and pronounced lowering of our standard of living.
Oh, well, to the point of dying. I mean, yeah, if you made everyone stay in their house for about 3 or 4 weeks, yes, COVID would probably go away or at least be greatly reduced. It would also kill tens of millions of people in this country alone.
Yeah.
But yes, we would get rid of COVID. We'd be able to say we did it, we saved the day, and like the buildings are all burning. So yes, I agree with that. So before I let you go, and I wish this is one of those episodes I wish we could go on 3 hours about this, because I now want to by the way, would you like to come back maybe in the future? Because I want to have this conversation about quite a few things. So I hope you would like to come back on in the future.
I'd love to.
Well, thank you. Well, before I let you go, Pete, thank you so much for your time. And I want to give you a chance to give your final thoughts. Plug your books, talk about any upcoming stuff. You might want to mention that book you wrote about anarchy back in 2014. It's up to you. But whatever you want to talk about, anything that you want to say, anything you feel like we didn't have a chance to talk about, as long as you want. Pete, soon to be doctor, and I say soon to be professor, but we'll see. Peter C. Earle, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, but my only closing thought is that we're currently in the throes of what's really the largest human engineered demonstration of chaos theory in social science history, right? And it's continuing to go on. And as long as it's going on, I'll keep writing about it. I have some more things in the works. I can be followed at Twitter. My Twitter handle is L1KNB. I know that sounds weird. If you search for Pete Earle, Earle, L1KNB stands for Let a Thousand Nations Bloom, which is a statement of very, very, profound individuality. It's meant to be very individualistic. And I'm on Amazon.com. I have an author page, Peter C. Earle, Earle. And if you want to send me a message, tell me how little I know, pete.earle@aier.org. You can find me on the AIR website. And if anyone out there, in particular on Twitter, is absolutely certain that we are heading for hyperinflation, do me a favor, send me an email. Let's say if you believe hyperinflation is going to occur within the next 2 years, send me an email and let's discuss the terms of making a very friendly but public bet over it.
Okay. He's calling me out. So because I do think
no, not necessarily.
No, but I am of the belief that we are potentially on the beginning curve of what will lead to hyperinflation if something doesn't change, and it could be in a 2 or 3 year period. And I may be wrong. I hope that desperately hope I'm wrong.
Sure. No, So my response, I mean, I don't know how much time I have. I'll just say this quickly. I
Say
think
whatever you want.
hyperinflation, I've written about hyperinflation in regular scenarios. I wrote an article in 2013 about hyperinflation in Diablo 3, which occurred there for real economic reasons. But basically, hyperinflation is an interesting topic. It's very exotic. It rarely happens. I mean, you don't need a hyperinflation to destroy your life, destroy a
Right.
nation, destroy the economy. A mere and very unsexy 20% per year will do the trick. Ask
Right.
any of my Argentinian friends what 15% inflation per year looks like
Yep.
over time. I mean, I can't say we're not heading for a hyperinflation. I strongly believe we're not. But I also know that, and this was not at all targeting you, Spike. People who have said to me, hyperinflation right around the corner. I've said, I doubt it for a few reasons. But hopefully I'm wrong.
Hopefully
Hopefully
you're
I'm right.
right. No, hopefully you're right.
Hopefully I'm right.
Hopefully we're
Yes.
nowhere
No,
near
no, no.
hyperinflation because like you
Yes.
said, just double-digit
Hopefully
inflation
they're wrong.
is
Yes.
yes, hopefully I'm wrong that we're without some major sea change in policy 2 or 3 years away from, things doubling in price every couple weeks or every couple months.
Yeah,
I
15% per
hope
month.
yeah, listen, double digits over month it might not be hyper, but it's enough to wreck everything. So it maybe just takes a little bit longer. So hopefully we're both wrong and Joe Biden is going to build back better and everything's going to be okay. Because there are times when people are like, "You're wrong, man. Libertarians are wrong." I'm like, I hope we're wrong. We keep being right, and I hate it.
Oh,
Like I want Joe Biden to be right.
I've never been as right as since I began to espouse libertarian views.
Exactly. And the misery that comes with it. So,
Yes.
Pete, thanks so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate it. This was a fantastic topic.
My pleasure.
And
Thank you.
I definitely would want to have you on and again in the future, but thank you again for coming
Sure.
on.
Thanks very much. It was great to be here. Have a great day.
rhymes, putting ease to the minds like mine. Sometimes darkness is all I find. You know what they say about an eye for an eye in a time when the blind lead the blind. Who am I to deny I would cry when a loved one dies? I recognize that body outside with the holes in the body that was alive. Now confined to a chalk outline. Find out how, but you never know why. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. That's my sister, mother, father, brother, son. That's one of mine. All these years I close my eyes, open up to only find I'm in line. There's a pointless murder happening all the time. Either lose your life or mine, caught up in them versus I. That ain't how it started, nah. How were we supposed to survive? There's a war going on outside. Who would want to raise a child? Who